This is the County Line Podcast, a production of Free Speech America. And now, here are your hosts, Kris Ranney, Garth Hilton, and Kevin Virgil.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the County Line Podcast. We are so grateful to have you here with us today, here in the Free Speech America virtual studios. And we want to say thank you to all of you who have supported free speech in America over these last, well, hopefully your lifetimes. But that's why we're here. We want to be able to exercise our freedom of speech and to see just the impact that we can have on the local level. The County Line Podcast, we are here learning and living liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. And we're just grateful that you're here with us. It is the normal cadre of hosts for the County Line Podcast this morning. I'm Garth Hilton, and Kris Ranney is with us, as well as Kevin Virgil. Hi, guys. How are you doing?
Morning. Doing well.
Hey, Garth. Good morning.
Good. Doing well. I know we've all been getting over some gunk, and so have a lot of our viewers and listeners, and but we're here ready to go. Our purpose on the County Line Podcast is to connect with and mobilize ordinary Americans just like us. That's all we are, in their local communities, learning and living liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. So what's on tap for this episode today, guys? What are we going to tackle?
Well, I personally am fascinated with what's happening with Doge, and on a national level, would like to talk about that. Also curious about some rumblings we've heard from Governor Reynolds here in the state of Iowa, as she brings up Doge, and just in my cursory investigation on what she's doing, I'm more curious than I am excited, but I'd like to talk about that. And then I also am fascinated with the progress that Doge is making, and would love to just chat a little bit about some of the things that we see happening.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And, given that this is a free speech focused podcast, I think everybody here, we're free speech maximalists. I am just riveted by what's unfolding in Europe right now, how our European friends are going in a very different direction, and being extremely open about it and expressing surprise that we're not on board. So we can talk about that too.
Sounds
Yeah,
great.
very good.
And
very
hey,
good.
I'd like to take just a minute to just mention to our audience, whatever platform you're listening to us on, if you would take a minute to like and possibly subscribe to our podcast, that will help us get our message out. So if you support and appreciate what we're doing and what we're talking about, that would be great. We'd love to have your support in that way.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Yep. Thank you so much, everybody. All right. So I guess let's dig in. It has been remarkable what's been going on in terms of Doge, Elon Musk, and his band of, MIT teenagers and whatever else. But yeah, so what's some of the takes that you all have that have just, really got you
one of those
interested?
kids is from Omaha, right? Are you aware of that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's pretty wild. Yeah,
He was or is a student at University of Nebraska.
that's right.
At Omaha or Lincoln? I guess I'm not
Lincoln.
clear.
Yeah, this is the kid that he developed an algorithm, basically an AI algorithm that can actually read these, like these undated, but I mean certainly multi-thousand-year-old scrolls that are basically they've atrophied to the point that they're unreadable. You can't even unroll them without destroying them. And he basically cracked this code that enables scholars to start reading the text, and he found some Greek text in there, and it's blowing everybody's mind. So you get like these hyper competent kids like that are just blowing the minds of all these career bureaucrats that have made very lucrative livings out of just milking the taxpayer and stonewalling any attempts to rein them in. It's wild what's happening right now.
Right. It's so refreshing, surprising, and really extraordinary with this team. And it's it's also fascinating too, because I think what is actually, and this is true in many arenas in life, but certainly in the Doge process, I think what is fascinating is what is happening on the narrative level, what we're hearing, what's being presented, what's being talked about, versus maybe it's not exactly the same, on the ground and where things are actually happening. And I think one of the things I've come to recognize and appreciate and enjoy about Trump and his, when I say Trump, I mean Trump and his entire team that are behind him, helping guide this, but they are masters at narrative. And so, one of my favorite podcasters makes the comment often, it's like the person with the best story wins. So it's not even so much necessarily about just getting the truth out there and facts and figures and really giving people a strong understanding of what's happening on the ground, but it's more so important that you win the narrative in terms of explaining it to people, helping people understand it, helping people relate to it, where it captures their imagination and providing information in such a way that we can absorb it and understand it and relate to it. And so that's one thing I find fascinating, even with this Doge process, because they're being presented as this team of teenage, autistic, multi talented kids that are just tearing it up in DC. And I think I'm certainly convinced that they are a part of it. But I did do some research just on Wikipedia in terms of the entire Doge team, and it's far more extensive, than just a handful of kids that are super scary smart. There's attorneys and there's lifelong government employees, and I've got a list here, and they've got experience.
Kris has got a list.
I got a list, yeah, but they've got experience. Some of them work for SpaceX, some of them work for Morgan Stanley, some of them have actually worked, at other social media, and some of them are lifelong or at least long-term government employees that have worked in different arenas. And so it's not just these kids, but it makes for a great story. So
it certainly does. And there's so many fascinating things about how this has played out. I mean, those lawyers have clearly done their homework in how to set this whole thing up, right? They knew that the swamp was going to try to shut them down in the courts, try to shut them down bureaucratically, try to stonewall them, try to defund any efforts to give funding to Doge. So what Trump did, which is fascinating to me, is he took some obscure federal agency that was, I think it was called the U.S. Digital Service or something, and
created by Obama.
Yeah, created by Obama, and it had funding, right? Not a lot, but Doge doesn't need a lot, right? So they just rebranded it, kept the funding, and Congress has mandated its existence, and they just repurposed it. And there's been a few low level left wing judges that have tried to shut this down, but so far those the White House is winning all the appeals. So it's. Yeah, heads are exploding everywhere. What's remarkable to me is just how partisan the response has been. You've got, and I'm not trying to villainize the Democrats here, but rather than be infuriated that literally potentially trillions of our tax dollars have been stolen from us over the years, they're upset that the fraud's been uncovered. And it's amazing to me that this isn't just Americans unified in the streets with pitchforks and torches right now. That this is actually a partisan fight. Why would you pick this issue to object to? Right? I mean, instead of being upset at the confirmation that we've all suspected, right? That there's just this fraud at such a rampant scale, right? They're trying to personally attack Elon Musk, trying to accuse them of political bias. It's insane to me, and I don't understand why this political party, by the Democrats, at least at the national level, are just so focused on committing suicide right now. Nobody, there's not a serious person I know who's taking that side of the argument.
Yeah, Yeah, it's amazing. And, I can't wait to also learn what this is going to mean to the Uniparty. I, it's just not going to affect Democrats.
No,
Uh, I hope
they're
to see the long chain of usurpations and abuses monetarily lead back to whatever treasure chest it leads to, um, because it's going to be filling the coffers of some Republicans as well. And, I want to know all of that. And if that happens, uh, then I'll be extremely impressed with these efforts. Um, but, ultimately, though, it's also going to come down to any continual resolution, any budget that the Republicans have all the power to create. Are they going to line item out these agencies that have already been doged, or are they going to continue to offer them funding through the budget? So we need to see real boots on the ground, practical response to this kind of fraud from the Congress and using the power of the purse. Otherwise, I'm afraid it could just turn into bells and whistles.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's fascinating too that our very own Joni Ernst has managed to find herself leading the cause in terms of representing the legislation in DC.
yeah,
Interesting, but
not surprising.
what she does with it, I guess we'll see. I know most Iowans have been very displeased. Is a nice way to put it, I guess, of what she's been doing recently, and my confidence that she's going to lead this well is not there. But what
Yeah,
can we do?
it's not surprising, and it's I think that's one of the most unfortunate I guess side effects of something as radical as Doge is that it's because it's got such strong bipartisan support. Every corrupt or at least incompetent and or useless politician is working overtime to wrap themselves around the Doge theme. Look at Joni Ernst, right, who spent the last 4 years doing absolutely nothing for the state of Iowa, right? It's just basically just been hiding out and vote endorsing everybody but Trump. Like moving to to convict and imprison all of the January 6th protesters, all the things that like conservatives in Iowa don't want to see. Suddenly, she's wrapping herself around the Doge theme because she woke up, or rather, her campaign manager woke up on November 7th and said, "Oh, you're in cycle now. You got to demonstrate that you're doing something." So she's grabbed onto this Doge theme and tried to portray herself as being like a champion of government efficiency. Meanwhile, all of the other Iowa politicians are posting photos of themselves with Trump, with his cabinet appointees, like popular appointees like Tulsi Gabbard or RFK Jr. And I just saw Miller Meeks, who barely squeaked by her election and is extremely unpopular in her district, was doing exactly the same thing. And sadly, when you've got low voter participation and voter turnout in elections, it's a winning strategy, right? Because it's the majority of our voters aren't paying attention.
On that, that does lead me a little bit, and probably out of the three of us, I would be the strongest conspiracy theorist.
We'll see about that.
one angle
beer.
that I'm
Yeah.
What's that? Hold your beer.
Hold my beer.
One angle that I'm finding fascinating in this whole thing, and it's a theory, and it's a theory that I probably agree with 70%. I guess if I have to put a number on it, is this whole notion that this whole process, Doge and government exposing government fraud and abuse and all that, is that Doge just found all this. How horrible! We just found it this week, and last week we found that, and next week we're going to find this. And I find that it's a convenient story, but I find it a hard pill to swallow. It's, I guess my thought is that Trump was aware of this, these issues even in his first term, maybe before it. And when I say Trump, again, I say Trump and his team, the people that back him. And I won't go into the details of who that might be, but I think this stuff has been in their view for many years. I don't think they're just now finding it.
Conspiracy. That's just
fact.
Right.
But in his first term, the American people, we weren't ready. We weren't ready for this. We weren't in a place where we could accept and absorb this information for a number of reasons. But now, because of just a lot of things happening in the past couple of years, all of a sudden, I think people are ready to hear it. And then, I don't think it's necessarily just the Doge team that's finding these line items and these problems. It's my assumption and belief that there have been people within these different departments, whether it's USAID or Department of Justice, Treasury, whatever, that have been, maybe call them whistleblowers. I don't know. I think that's kind of not the best term, but people that have been aware of these issues within these departments and have been communicating these issues with people that matter. And so it's not just Doge finding it. I think they've got people guiding the way saying, oh, yeah, you need to look at this and you need to look at this. And this has been a problem for 20 years. And so I think it's far more extensive in terms of the network of people that are helping to expose this. But I think that you don't hear a lot about that kind of in terms of the general, and I don't say mainstream media because we don't listen to them, but even just conservative new medias that a lot of people listen to, they're not even talking about that. So I that's an interesting angle. I wondered what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, look, I think that it's been widely known that at a minimum, there are hundreds of billions of dollars of inefficiencies. There's the most polite word I could come up with to describe what's happening in our federal government, and it has been happening basically for our entire lives. Right? Everybody in DC knew that USAID was riddled with all kinds of shady contracts. Right? It is true that USAID they have this thin veneer of humanitarian work that they do abroad. Like I'm a former U.S. federal government employee who's served overseas, and I've encountered all of the all of the hippies who work in USAIDs, basically like the front, like doing humanitarian work. But it's also widely known that USAID runs all of the all the dirty tricks and all of the regime change campaigns that are too that are too touchy to give to the intelligence communities that are subject to congressional oversight. Right? Everybody knew that that USAID was funding regimes that were doing things that were even in direct opposition to American interests, or certainly American corporate interests. Right? Like promoting censorship in countries like Brazil, so that they could clamp down on American social media companies and freedom of speech. Doing the same thing in Europe. Right? And just to bring it back to Iowa, for example, like all four of the members of Congress in Iowa, who are some of the most useless Republicans in the country, voted against a measure just 2 years ago, by the way. This just happened, 2023. There was an amendment to a bill that would have cut USAID's funding in half, right? Because it's widely known that a lot of their activity needs to be reined in. It's detrimental to the American people. And there was substantial Republican support to do that. All four of the Iowa House Republicans voted against that amendment. They voted to keep funding USAID. So these people who are in Iowa right now and are crowing, like wrapping themselves around the Doge flag and talking about how great this is. I mean, these are the same people that have been voting to maintain the grift and the fraud all this time.
Right, and that's why.
Go ahead. Sorry, Garth. Go ahead.
And that's why we have to have Trump, with his power, it's his party now, come through Congress and actually do something budgetarily that has real teeth. Because otherwise, right now, I mean, I could see where this again is a complete Republican, Democrat, uniparty, Lucy in the football. Okay, look at the bells and whistles here, but in the end, nothing actually gets covenanted through the budget to actually make deep, long-term cuts. And if that doesn't happen, that's what we need to be pressuring to take place right now. Brilliant, all of this expose, bringing this stuff out into the open, the transparency, love it, but it needs to be codified.
So the question that occurs is, pinging off both of your comments, has to do with people that are on board now that maybe weren't on board with, like say, cutting funding to USAID 2 years ago. Do you guys think that the politicians, and we'll just talk about Iowa politicians, our Iowa representatives, they're not necessarily true believers in, cutting the purse strings, but do you think that their compliance and their cooperation with Doge and with things that Trump is trying to do is more of a, Trump's got them over a barrel, like how can they oppose this? He's winning this narrative, and so they have no choice but to join in and support that. So, I mean, does that make sense? That it's more about their kind of forced to come to heel in these issues because of their past complicity, maybe even in the fraud. So.
No, yeah. Look what's happening in the Senate.
Washington
right?
kind of seems to work,
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that's absolutely happening right now. Trump has well over 60% approval rating. Doge has broadly bipartisan support. And look, I think there are there are quite a few senators, to include Ernst here in Iowa, who have made a career out of publicly expressing support and then kneecapping any serious attempt to rein in government because she's owned by her large donors and the special interests that put her into office, like the Branstad wing of the Republican Party or Big Ag, right? And in the past, she if you take for example, she had initially expressed some opposition to Trump's Secretary of Defense pick, Pete Hegseth, right? It was pretty clear that she was going to be a roadblock to his confirmation. But I think we're in a new era right now. Like the corporate media has lost the American people. They've squandered their reputation, and now citizen journalists and social media mobs have taken over. And there was such a groundswell of support for all of Trump's cabinet picks that everybody made it clear, to include Elon Musk, who said he was going to set aside hundreds of millions of dollars to back primary opponents for anybody who opposed Trump's cabinet picks. Like Joni Ernst was, she doesn't have much character, but she's not stupid, at least politically. And she realized that, this is a new era, and she was going to suffer the consequences at the ballot box if she didn't support those cabinet picks. So she gritted her teeth and supported Hegseth and everybody else.
Well, that and the rumor behind it, I don't remember if we talked about this a few weeks back, but that the reason she was withholding her support originally for Hegseth was because she was gunning for leadership in the committee that was going to oversee Doge. And
yeah, she went down to Mar-a-Lago to lobby for the Sec Dev job herself, and I don't think Trump even entertained the conversation with her. It was never taken seriously. So I think she was personally annoyed by that and tried to take it out on Trump in a passive aggressive manner, and I think was quickly advised that it would be a bad idea for her longevity in the Senate.
So this is interesting, all of this with Doge, and I'd like to try and bring it to our more local context. And again, this whole show is about to serve as a template for everybody across America about what can be done in your community locally. And so We've heard some rumblings, maybe something from Governor Reynolds about Iowa Doge. But then my question is, why don't we have in every county in America concerned citizens who are convening their own Doge committees? And that needs to happen. Why not? So let's figure that out.
I think that's a great idea, right? I think the lesson learned from the federal Doge team is that, if you just follow the money, right? If you just, because this information, sure, maybe there's an exception for a few classified contracts, right, in the interest of national security, but the vast majority of federal spending should be open sourced for everybody to scrutinize, right? Everybody who has the tools to do that, and being able to do what these guys did, where they just quickly mapped out like this incredibly sophisticated map of, I think, 55,000 NGOs that are misusing taxpayer funds to promote left-wing activist causes globally, and that needs to be put under the microscope. And yeah, I think you absolutely have that happening at a smaller scale in local government, right? Probably right there in your home county, or even in your town or your municipality. So yeah, we absolutely need this. You saw. Has anybody seen Reynolds' self-congratulatory announcement that she set up an Iowa Doge?
Yes, I've got an article about it right here, and it's fascinating, Kevin, because it's the task force. I'll just read a little clip out of here for you. It's led by Sukup Manufacturing Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel Emily Schmidt. I need to do some digging on who she is, but she's focusing this effort. And it's interesting, the three categories that they present as Iowa Doge. I mean, that's the first, in reading this article, that's my first point of saying, is that really Doge? But their focus is on maximizing return on taxpayer investment, leveraging emerging technology, and further refining workforce and job training programs. Does that in any way correlate to the national description of what Doge is?
No, of course
I sure
not.
don't see it. And so I think it's interesting that she's capitalizing on the term Doge and thinking, oh, well, I was doing Doge, but I don't see any similarity. Do you?
No, it's like Reynolds has spent the last several years, right? She's, she's guilty of enormous conflicts of interest with her corporate donors. We talked about the carbon capture pipeline, which is a huge issue in my corner of the state, and all the money she's taken from the backers of that pipeline, right? And all the things she's done to compromise herself with the approval process. And meanwhile, there's Iowa has a state auditor, right? I mean, he's a Democrat, and all the signs are that he's going to be her gubernatorial opponent in the upcoming election. But his job is still to audit the state, the state budget. And I don't know if you guys saw, there was a headline. I think Iowa, we just started these education savings accounts last year. I think there's $100 million spent just last year alone, and the auditor's office is trying to audit those funds to make sure they're used appropriately, and Reynolds won't open the books up, right? Which is a gigantic red flag, right? She claims she's not going to do it because the auditor is politically biased. Like, well, look, he's still an elected official, right? And what you're proposing right now is that the people should just trust you to spend $100 million with no accountability, with no oversight. It's an incredibly it's an extremely arrogant position for her to take, even for her.
Well, and that's my question. And Garth, I don't know if you have an opinion on it, but since he is certainly looking to run for something, is this, I read this article, it talks about it a little bit. It's actually 129 million that goes to this fund, and he's complaining that they won't let them look at it, which, I would agree that's a problem. If it's a valid program and there's nothing to hide, it should be looked at. But at the same time, is he doing it in a way to, strike at her in terms of her governorship? Is he doing it because in general, Democrats and liberals are not supportive of the supporting Christian schools and private schools and that sort of thing. So then, then you have to question, well, what's his ultimate motive? Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to discern that, I think.
Well, look, does, the auditor, Rob Sand, have political motives to make Reynolds look bad, to look stupid? Of course he does. But at the same time, I hate to use that line, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But I mean, in this case, I think it applies because she's a public official entrusted with, with making sure taxpayer funds are allocated efficiently and in the way and openly. If those funds are being used to, to improve the, frankly, kind of dismal quality of the state's education system, right? And it was her big push to reallocate funds away from the AEAs, the area education agencies, right, and to take discretionary authority away from them, and to have the money start following the kids, right, with these education savings accounts. I mean, why, if that's her initiative, why would she not want to be open and transparent about it, right? It's extremely, I wouldn't say maybe it's not a red flag, but it's an extremely strong yellow flag that I think it's not going to do her any favors if she continues trying to hide it.
Which I don't understand already. How is it that these numbers are even not transparent? I don't even understand that concept. How can something like this be hidden? I mean, I should, as a citizen, be able to go to a web page and see everything listed. I mean, so this just blows my mind that this type of transparency is not already built into the cake. And so this is a huge problem with our government in general, that
Correct.
This kind of transparency isn't built into the cake. So, or baked into the cake, whatever we want to say.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, in the year 2025, right, there should be real-time tracking of every dollar of taxpayer funds and where it's allocated to, unless there's a compelling, national security related reason to shield that for public scrutiny. I mean, there's no reason now, and that those don't exist at the state level. Sorry. So yeah, it's very concerning, and I think it's going to come back to bite her.
Right. And I don't necessarily accuse or assume that, there's fraud going on with those, with this funding, who knows? But you're right. It needs to be transparent. And and just in terms of, Doge that's happening in DC, the other point that I'm trying to make on social media, I don't know if it's sinking in or not, is, people are offended by the fact that $20 million went to Afghanistan's to create a Sesame Street for Afghan children. $10 million went to support transgender opera in Venezuela. There's all these outrageous line items where this money's going, which is aggravating enough. Just if that's where the money is being sent, that in itself is outrageous, and Americans are certainly, irritated and angry about that. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is, just because the money says it's going for XYZ program, is it really? Is that just a label that's put on it? And is the money actually just passing through these thousands and thousands of NGOs that are taking this money? And then once it goes into their coffers, where does it end up? Does it end up getting kicked back to politicians that are helping support it? Is it going to help fund terrorist organizations? Is it going to buy off foreign politicians? We don't really know. I mean, that's kind of the rumor and the gist of where this is. Whoops, sorry about that. Where this is going. So that's a problem, certainly, on the federal level. Whether that's happening in Iowa, I'm not accusing that, but I agree with you guys both. It needs to be transparent. It's our money. People should be able to look at the checkbook and see this is where it's going, and then be able to trace that even to the programs that the money's going to, and see some kind of accountability or some kind of facts and figures that say this is how it's being spent. But that's, I suppose, a state of Iowa legislation issue that we need to be pushing
I
for.
couldn't agree more. It's remarkable to me when you take a step back and look at just the ridiculous level of entitlement these career bureaucrats have, as if they're somehow offended that, the rubes out there in Main Street would dare to question where the money they take from us every year, at gunpoint, basically, is being spent, right? Like it's somehow beneath them to answer questions about how the taxpayers' funds are being used, right? Meanwhile, we've got members of Congress that, are now worth over $200 million after serving for 30 plus years and a $200,000 salary. It just doesn't make any sense, right? Or it does. What's happening, and it's happening. I'm sure to a less obnoxious degree at the state level as well. But I think what I'm most hopeful about in what's happening right now, and I think we're living through like a pivot point in history right now, like in the last few weeks. There's a sea change in the public's expectation of its elected officials right now, and I hope it continues to move, like the pendulum continues to swing in the other direction.
And you made a good point earlier, and we wanted to talk about it. I think it coincides with the pushback that a lot of the European governments and bureaucracies are giving to the Trump administration. And I think J.D. Vance's speech over to the EU, I think, was incredible. And how I think it was the EU president or somebody like that afterwards got up on stage, and at the end of his speech, he couldn't even finish because he was crying about the implications of what J.D. Vance said. And if you want to speak to that a little bit more and have this conversation, because here we have, it's not just in America, but it is the corruption, especially it's like a trans-global entity. At least trans-European entity, the EU, and all of the corruption that must exist within that group of governments. It's the ripple effects are going to be interesting. And go ahead.
Yeah, that speech, by the way, I think it's 18 minutes in duration, right? Maybe we can put out some sort of note with a link to it if anybody wants to listen to it. But it's one of the most remarkable speeches like an American head of state has given. I can't remember the last time. It was so remarkable.
Tear down this wall, probably.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe that was it.
Probably since Reagan.
36 years ago. So, by the way, just for record, this is the same security conference, right? It was in Munich. Kamala Harris went there, and 3 years ago, she basically started the war in Ukraine when she walked into that conference and said it was America's goal for Ukraine to join NATO, right? Which is, everybody knew, everybody in the foreign policy establishment knew that was a gigantic red line for Russia that they would not allow to happen. They would never allow Ukraine to join NATO. And she went in there and basically just said that was the Biden administration's policy. And then the war started, a short time later. So Vance walks in there thinking that, and that the Euro elites thought he was going to be talking about Ukraine. And instead he just calls them out for just a shameless pivot towards censorship, right? Like I think there was just an interview that a bunch of German prosecutors did on 60 Minutes where they just said that in Germany, it's okay to imprison somebody if they insult another person, right? Or if they hear another opinion they don't like. And Vance called that out. He called out the Brits. I guess there was a story about there was a pro-life protester in Britain who was silently praying like outside of an abortion clinic, right? Silently praying, just standing there. And the cops accosted him, and the British police, right, asked him who he was praying for. And when he said it was his unborn child, they arrested him. And I think he's been subjected to just all sorts of, of prosecution there. And he called that out. I mean, rightly so. It's incredible. I mean, and basically what he said was, one of the most amazing lines I've heard an American official say was that, if you're that afraid of your people that you have to cancel elections in Romania and you have to prosecute and imprison people for speech, then you've got no business running the country. And there's nothing America could do for you, and there's nothing more importantly that you could do for America and its people, which I thought was just an incredible line. And the look on these people's faces, it was incredible. It's just like walking into a room with the most obnoxious, just entitled people, and just telling them to their face that their whole party was a sham. Like the entire environment that they've created over the last few years, and that we're no longer going to be a part of it. We're no longer going to fund it. It was incredible, and you could see heads exploding, right? And I loved it. It was fantastic.
Yeah. NS Lion on Substack had a great article out, and I'll put a link to it in the description as well. But it's really this whole technocratic government scheme that we've been running since, let's say, after World War II, for sure, where these bureaucrats think that they have control because it's their duty as the elites to shepherd democracy, because we, the people, can no longer be trusted with shepherding democracy or our republic here in America. And so for them to feel like they're losing control because of Doge, and also the censorship issue, and their heads are exploding because perhaps, and we'll see what happens in the next 2 to 6 to 10 years, do we, the people, take back our rightful authority, at least here in America? Because it was just not too long ago that we had political prisoners in America because they were praying silently in front of abortion clinics.
Right.
So
yeah, they were just released a few weeks ago.
This is the technocratic cabal and tyranny that is throughout the West. And if that doesn't get dismantled, and this is where I'm a little less trusting in terms of Thiel and Musk and their motives exactly, to have technocrats wanting to take apart technocrats. But hey, let's see. But we must do that at the county level. We must do that in our own cities. We have to take on the authority that we have as Americans to enforce our Constitution. And if we're not willing to do that locally, then I really think we're just whistling past the graveyard in terms of what can happen on a grander scale with the feds or with the EU and so forth. So we've got 100%. To man up and take responsibility for ourselves locally if we really want to have hope in terms of the grander scale. That has to happen.
Well, it's an interesting, I mean, we could talk about this for a long time, but it's an interesting concept when you think about, Thiel and Musk and some of these people that we would probably put in the basket of elites, that countries that have had revolutions, positive revolutions, or positive changes, sea changes that completely changed the direction of their country, a lot of those are led by what you would consider patriotic elites. There's people that are certainly elite that want to control and destroy and, not do good for the people of their country. But then, are there people like Musk and Thiel and some of these others that would be considered elites? And as an American people, could we have affected these changes without Trump and Musk and these people jumping in and saying, hey, we're going to help lead this revolution? I don't know. I mean, I even think of the American Revolution, the people that kind of helped kick that off and lead that were probably considered, Washington and Adams and all those guys, they were probably considered the elites of the colonies at the time. And could the people, without the leadership and the support of that effort, have done what they did? I don't know. But it goes to me, the bigger conversation, as I just try and really take a step back and not get lost in all the details in the leads, is a line that a lot of podcasters I listen to who would be considered conspiracy theorists say is this phrase: we're watching a movie. We're watching a movie. And if you think of a movie in terms of, you've got this, like a superhero movie, you've got this common person and, some evil character shows up and is going to destroy the city, and the hero, maybe the reluctant hero, realizes, okay, he can do something about this, and he steps forward and he puts forth this great effort, and he's battling against the evil dictator or whatever. And then there's always a setback. The hero gets injured or doubts himself or whatever, and he's kind of set back for a little while. But then in the end, he comes forth and defeats the monster. And if you think about that in terms of what we're seeing in the U.S., it kind of fits that. It kind of fits that narrative in terms of just with Trump, with what he did in his first term, and people were hopeful, and Trump's going to make a difference, and he's promised all these things. And it's very interesting if you take the time to go back and listen to his speeches in his first campaign and first term. The things that we are seeing now, he talked about then. Now, he didn't accomplish them in his first term, but then as the hero of our story, he suffers a loss, and he's displaced as president for 4 years, and you've got this horrific monster that's threatening to destroy our country. But then in the end, he comes back and he wins again. And not only does he win again, he wins with this huge mandate of the American people behind him. And now it's like he's got his lightsaber out, and he's just like going to town.
Isn't that remarkable? Like
it really is. It really is a story. And that's what a lot of podcasters I listen to talk about. It's like, it's about the narrative. Now, these things are happening in reality, but it's about the narrative.
It is about the narrative. So again, hold my beer. Because as far as conspiracy theory, I mean, I don't even like the term. I mean, but beyond that, the theory, the hero who locked us down and spent more money in presidential history, I don't see him as a hero. I'm very skeptical of his powers as well, and everything that transpired the last year of his presidency. So he's not my hero, but sure, can we the people use people to get us to a place that will be better? I hope so. I pray so. But yeah, as far as us watching a movie, you bet. It's a wonderful reality TV, and we're all having to live in it. That's why I'm more interested in the real people that are closer to us, and us taking responsibility for our citizenship. That's something else I'll put in the link, is a link to what's happening at ARC this week in terms of the Alliance of Responsible Citizens and a lot of those great speeches that are taking place in Britain right now. Because we have to create our own movie, our own movements, our own efforts of responsible citizenship locally. Because I do not trust the way the cameras pan from this national perspective. We need to worry about where we're at locally And when we can manifest and show that we have done the work and put in the time to take back our authority as we the people locally, that's where the power really is going to exist to change the trajectory of what's been happening over the last 100 years in America.
I have an idea. Why
go ahead.
don't we start a GoFundMe and raise some money to go hire a bunch of like just cracked 21-year-old hackers and have them map out every transaction in every state and local like government agency, and we just put all that up on a website for people to just audit themselves and scrub and point out where the inefficiencies are, and more importantly, where the fraud is going. I would donate to an effort to do that.
There could be some movement of that. I know there's a website I've spent time on in the past about that outlines political donations to our even our state leaders. You know, you can see the teachers unions giving money even to Republican candidates. You know, so there's it's kind of
now you're getting somewhere. That's extremely shady. Because the super PAC donations, right? Those are those don't actually go to the candidates, right? So you can't track those on like the FEC website, right? I mean, all that that $1 billion that went to Kamala Harris, or the $300 million that went to Trump, like a lot of that's just not even trackable.
Well, even in Iowa, I mean, we have the Iowa Majority Fund, which most of the candidates who run for office in Iowa are pressured, arm twisted into donating the money they collect in terms of donations, and it goes into the Iowa Majority Fund. Then the Republican Party of Iowa actually manages that money, takes it in, and then they distribute it to where they see fit. And on one hand, I see there's some benefit to that, but on the other hand, it just kind of provides a vehicle for control and making sure your candidates stay in line based on
of course
leadership. And it's not what the people want, and it's very difficult for candidates to run and be successful, and that's part of it. Although I have heard rumors that there are fewer and fewer either current elected people that are running again and new candidates that are balking at turning over their funds to that group. So I find that encouraging, but it all boils down to the issue or the topic of sovereignty. One of the and I'll put this and we can link it in our comments too. One of the early on series of articles called "Righteous Russia" was written by one of my vlogcasters I listen to, and he talked a lot about the history of Russia and kind of the leadership of Russia and where it's come as a country. But early on, he was talking about the importance that countries are sovereign. We've got the America First movement where we want America to be sovereign. Well, that's what's been happening even in Russia in the last few years, is that they want to be disconnected from the global power structure, and they want to be sovereign over their own country. And regardless of what you think about Putin or Russia, I think that's a good thing. But then that does even translate, Garth, into what you say, the idea of, as a county, are we sovereign? As a state, are we sovereign? As a community, are we sovereign to make the best decisions for our lives and our communities as we think fit? And I feel like that's kind of the ultimate good versus evil battle that we're in. It's like we've got elites, whether they are Republican, state of Iowa, Republican leadership, or state level leadership, or big business in Iowa, and they want to be the ones that decide our policies. Or, the converse is, do we, the people, actually vote for what's best for us and for ourselves, for our families, and for our state? And that's a wrestling match. We haven't even begun that. So,
yep. Sovereignty and liberty can only exist where there's light. So to be theological about it, I mean, we need more light. We need more transparency, not less. And, what is the New York Times line? Something like, in darkness, democracies die, or something. Yeah.
That's the Washington Post. Yeah.
The Washington
exactly.
Post.
Right. Which is hilarious. It's pretty rich coming from them.
For sure.
Yeah.
So anyways, we are winding up here. Yes. I don't know if we have anything that we want to tease for next time or any final words that we want to say, but I'm excited for the future. I'm looking forward to more of what's going to come out from Doge, regardless of, whatever might be the movie that we're being shown. But to be able to be like, okay, how are we going to do this locally? And that's what we're all about here, right? The County Line Podcast. It's from learning and living liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. Because if we're not doing it here, it won't get done for us as we get further and further away from local municipalities, local governance. So, I'm excited and looking forward to a future of much greater light locally.
It's a good way to end it.
All right. Well,
I know pretty soon we're going to be hopefully having somebody join us from the Front Porch Republic to talk a little bit more about local liberty, and Adam Smith, I believe, eventually in the next, I'd say 2 or 3 weeks, hopefully will be joining us on the podcast. And I don't know if we have any other ideas or things that we want to push out there for upcoming episodes. But any thoughts and hopes for the future's episodes?
I'm working on scheduling some people that are, you would describe as, promoting of sovereign issues within communities and states. And so I've got a couple calls out. I'm also trying to do some research on this Iowa Doge. I'd like to dig into that a little more because I think the Iowa Doge, it sounds good, but I'm not sure it's really accomplishing what the name says it is. So I'm curious and trying to get some more input from people in Des Moines. Being in Council Bluffs, which is the very southwest corner of Iowa, I feel like we are, I don't know, we're just kind of out of touch when it comes to what's happening in Des Moines. But I have sources, so I'm working on contacting my sources.
Nice. No, I'm doing the same. I've got a few people in mind that I think would be fantastic guests for future episodes. Everybody from, local journalists who, are still doing their jobs, which unfortunately there aren't enough of them, to, a lot of these, we were talking about, this catchphrase, unite the clans, as in, the Braveheart reference to bringing all of these disparate groups, that are interested, broadly interested in the same things, right? Maybe they have like their niche cause, like one group may be focused on human trafficking, another group might be focused on free speech, but they all broadly believe in the same values. And I think bringing different people from those groups in just to have a conversation would be a great way to, just start making this soapbox a little higher and learning more about what's happening in our communities.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you, Kevin. Thanks, Kris. And we look forward to seeing you next week, or hearing from you, or you hearing from us, however this podcast thing works, from the County Line Podcast, where we're learning and living liberty from the kitchen table to the county line. God bless.
Bye, everybody.
If you are new to the podcast, be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform and join us next week for the next installment of the County Line Podcast.